everybody, welcome to video 2 of month 1. So video 2 of the whole program. Now, the purpose of these videos is to give you the kind of the knowledge piece, the comprehension piece, so that we can have some really useful coaching conversations when we have our Zoom calls. So that's really what we're looking for. We're not looking for you to know this to pass an exam or anything. So if anybody wants an exam, I can do one for you. But we're looking for you to be able to apply these concepts. Remember, we're in the self-awareness phase of the program. And we will be revisiting these models and these lenses later on in the year. So by the end of the year, you'll be fluent in them. But for now, this is the first time you're exploring this. And exploring things like this in relation to ourselves tends to make it much easier to understand and get a grasp of before we apply it to other people. Okay? So what we're looking at in month 1 is transaction analysis and how this can really help us manage ourselves and manage other people. And also then look at understanding group dynamics, team dynamics, why people do what they do, and some of those unpredictable reactions as we learn more of these lenses become more predictable. And that gives us much more control over our life. So as I said last week, Eric Berne was the founder of transactional analysis. He felt that whilst a lot of psychotherapy was very powerful in going back to root causes, he also felt that there was an element missing about the fact that people go into different ego states when they're interacting and in different situations. And that these ego states significantly impact how they talk, the language they use, the metaphors they use, what they hear, how they filter things. And that by understanding these ego states that we go into when we're transacting and interacting with other people, we can learn more about ourselves and how we can be more effective in communication, in relationships, in life in general. So he founded transaction analysis, and there are 2 other names to know in this field, and that is Tom and Amy Harris. Now, Eric Berne wrote a book called Games People Play, which was about how these transactional analysis roles play out in real life. But what Tom and Amy Harris did was they translated it into everyday language. And they wrote 2 books. One is called I'm Okay, You're Okay. And the other's called Staying Okay. And if you want to read further, those are the 3 books I'd recommend for this month's theme. There are some more recent articles, but these are really get down to the core of it and how these ego states impact us in our daily lives. So if you remember, there are 3 ego states: parent, adult, child. And they all come from things we've learned quite early in life. So up to the age of about 5 or 6, we'll have lots of figures in our lives that we will give the parental role to. And they'll be saying things and doing things, and we'll be watching them and seeing them saying and doing these things. And then we absorb that into the ego state that will be our parent. Okay? And you can see this when children play, mummies and daddies. They'll take on the same behaviours they see their parental authority figures taking in their lives. The child state comes from what we experience from that. And so in our young life, we learn what the rules are, basically. And so we're either in an environment where our free child thrives, or we're in an environment where our good girl becomes more important. And I'll get more into that later. Because we looked at the free child in last week's video. This week, we're going to look at the good girl or compliant child. Now, the adult state is kind of what we evolve into. It's that balanced, empowered state that is us, and it's fairly non-emotive. It's not influenced by any of these other factors, and it's when we're most in control of our decisions. Now, the thing that Eric Berne made very clear was all of these states are perfectly okay. They're perfectly natural. They happen. And we can't necessarily stop them happening, but what we can do is if we're aware of them, we can choose when to allow them to manage our behaviour, which state we want to be in, and therefore we have more control over our actions and over ourselves, which sounds to me a pretty cool idea, especially if we want to be leaders. So let's take a look at the other child. Last week we looked at the free child, and the free child is fundamentally the kind of natural state we arrive into the world in. And we arrive this free, playful, self-centered character who basically we do what we want, joy and laughter and happiness is our goal, and we tend not to pay too much attention to other people unless they're serving our needs. If you think about it, that's what a baby and very young child is. Now, the other form of child ego state that comes in is what's called the compliant child or good girl. And one way of kind of imagining this is that as we grow, we are exposed to society rules, family rules, expectations, unstated norms. And these kind of impose some consequences on us. And so what can happen is that the good girl or compliant child ego state can evolve, and usually does. All these ego states usually evolve in all people, just we use them and access them to different extents. So if we think about the compliant child, let me just describe what the compliant child is like. So if you think about it, their focus is on other people. So they tend to be the peacemaker, they tend to be thoughtful, considerate of others. Because of that, they'll find ways to do things right. Okay? So they want to do the right thing. They want to be liked. They want to make sure everything goes smoothly. And they'll find efficient ways of doing things. There's another thing here as well, is they tend to be quite process-driven. And quite often, this will show up in when children play. So you'll have some children who just literally grab stuff and start playing with it and work it out as they go along. And then you'll have another child who sits there and there's, how am I supposed to play with this? Okay. The how am I supposed to play with this one is in the compliant or good child mode, because they want to do it right. So an example of this is my sister and I, as a family, we'd often go to dinner at relatives, and my sister and I would usually be told to wash up. So in the end, we started offering to do it. And I would just go in and start washing up. My sister, however, would always ask, how would you like us to do it? And I was like, what a stupid question. Yes, washing up. How difficult can it be? But interestingly, every relative had their own way of doing it. And my sister, by asking this, actually found this out and always got little gold stars or well dones. And by tagging along with her, I learned a little bit too. So there's a lot of really cool stuff and strength that comes from the good child ego state. Now, you can probably imagine now that some of these things aren't always effective for us in our lives. They can be very useful for us at times, but there's other times when they're not as appropriate. If you're always focused on other people, you might fear other people's opinions so much that you work extra hard to avoid any negative opinions. And if you do that, you might not be achieving the truth of a situation. This could be quite hard in the workplace. There's a big characteristic where nobody wants to give bad news to the boss on a project. Nobody wants to be the bad child that's doing it. You want to give them good news and be liked. So you never give the boss bad news, and that can end up in a big explosion further down the line. You also fear sharing your own opinions, because if you don't know what other people think first, how on earth do you know if they're going to like you if you state yours? What should yours be? And in fact, the good girl is one who uses should a lot. So it's interesting because I grew up personally as quite a free child, and then bam, I ran into all the rules and expectations of things, which was a bit of a shock to me. And at one stage in my life, I thought everyone else had had a rule book and nobody had shared it with me, because there seemed to be all these rules just slamming into me. And I actually became, by my mid-20s, I was very good at reading people because I'd always been a good girl and had to not upset them. It was made very clear to me that if anyone was upset with me, it was totally my fault. I learned to read people well, which was really good for my later work life. But it was interesting because I was once talking with someone, a counsellor, and they said, what do you want in your life? And I couldn't answer it. I had no idea what I wanted. I knew what I should want and what I should do, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'd been too long in the good girl mode. So it's really interesting when you see how some of these things kind of influence how you are in your day-to-day life. Also, if I'm trying to be a good girl, I'll get hurt easily. I'll tend to, if someone gives me feedback that means I haven't pleased them, I'll get really upset and emotional, very hard to give feedback to. So the issue with the compliant child ego state isn't that it's a bad thing. I mean, there's lots of strengths in being in this place. You can build skills in watching people. It really is the part of you that really cares about others. The challenge is that if you're in that ego state without being aware of it, you could be saying and doing things, or not saying and not doing things, that make it really hard for you to be successful and effective in your life. Interesting, isn't it? So we've looked at the two child states now. The free child or rebellious child, the good girl, compliant child. Now, both of these ego states develop when we're much younger, but we use them in our whole life. And one of the things we will be looking at in the second half of the month is that some of us have learned to use these states to get what we want. Have a think about that. Have a think about the fact that your unconscious mind will sometimes choose to really deliberately go into good girl mode in order to achieve a goal, because you know that by doing that, you'll trigger someone else to go into their parent mode to look after you. Ooh, isn't that interesting? So this can get quite complex. We're not going to get that complex yet. But it's interesting that what we want to do is understand these ego states for ourselves. So this week's assignment is the same as last week, actually. I want you to look at your life and identify where the good girl, compliant child has shown up and made a difference to you, positively and possibly negatively. So for me, I have lots of examples where my people-pleasing made me popular, got me liked, enabled me to build relationships and succeed at work. But I've also got plenty of examples where not speaking my mind, not wanting to upset people, led me to being confused about what I wanted and made it very hard for people to relate to me because I seemed to be a bit like a chameleon, changing my point of view depending who I spoke to. And I had to practice having my own opinion. You might find that hard, knowing me now as you do. You might find that hard to believe, but that was true. So this week, have a think. Where does this compliant child show up in a way that has helped you and in a way that's hindered you? So for our Zoom call on Friday, what we're going to be looking at is how these two child roles have helped us in our lives, how they've hindered us in our lives, and right now, how do you see them? How do you want them to be moving forward? Okay? Because what we're going to look at next is the parent states, and we're going to look at how can we get the most out of these ego states by using them together and being able to move freely between the different ego states. Any questions? Pop it into Facebook. And to be honest, if you could pop some of your thoughts and assignment feedback into the Facebook group before Friday, that's really helpful because it means I can get my head around some questions, I can get my head around some further information, and it also stimulates all of us to think about this. So it really would make a difference if you have a minute to pop your answers or thoughts into the Facebook group. Okay, put them in the thread under this video, and I'll see you on Friday. Okay, take care, everybody.